So there's this woman, mid-50s, dealing with the usual stuff. Blood sugar her doctor's been watching, joints that don't cooperate in the morning, tired in a way that sleep doesn't fix. Someone told her to chew 2 cloves every morning. 2 cloves, the spice. 2 weeks later, she went back to her doctor. Her post-meal blood sugar had dropped significantly. Her gums had stopped bleeding when she brushed. She said the inside of her mouth felt different, cleaner, in a way she hadn't felt in years. That wasn't placebo. It was a compound called eugenol, and at least one of its effects showed up in a clinical study in just 12 days. Not 12 weeks, 12 days. Most people think of cloves as a baking spice. What they don't know is that cloves rank at the top of every antioxidant scale ever measured. Above blueberries, above acai, above pomegranate. And for centuries before synthetic drugs existed, dentists used the active compound in cloves as their primary anesthetic. The most powerful thing in your spice rack has been hiding in plain sight. What I want to show you today is exactly what eugenol does and why the timeline surprised everyone. So let's talk about what eugenol actually does, because antioxidant gets thrown around so much it's basically lost all meaning. Let me give you the specific version. Your body, right now, is running a low-grade inflammatory response. If you're over 40, that's almost guaranteed. It doesn't announce itself. You don't feel it as a specific pain. But it's there, quietly, in the background. And it's driven by something called COX-2, an enzyme your body produces when it senses damage or threat. It's the exact same target that ibuprofen and aspirin go after. That's their whole mechanism. Eugenol inhibits COX-2. Research from the Federal University of Visosa showed eugenol neutralizing roughly 80% of measured free radicals in lab conditions, working through the same anti-inflammatory pathway as over-the-counter pain medication, without the side effects on your stomach lining. And that connects to something most people don't think about. Your mouth is not separate from the rest of your body. That sounds obvious, but the way most people treat oral health suggests they don't actually believe it. The harmful bacteria in your mouth don't stay there. They enter your bloodstream through your gums every single day, and once they're circulating, they trigger an inflammatory response in places that have nothing to do with your teeth, your joints, your cardiovascular system, your blood sugar regulation. So what does that mean if you're already dealing with elevated blood sugar or stiff joints? It means the problem may have 2 sources, and most people are only addressing one of them. The gums are a gateway into the whole system. Most people just don't know it. So when eugenol starts working on those bacteria, which it does almost immediately when you chew a clove, it's not just freshening your breath. It's cutting off a source of systemic inflammation that's been quietly feeding other problems downstream. And this is the part that genuinely concerns me. Most people in their 50s and 60s have been living with low-grade chronic inflammation for years, sometimes decades. They've adjusted to it. The fatigue feels like aging. The blood sugar slowly climbing feels like just what happens. The morning stiffness feels inevitable. It isn't inevitable, but it is cumulative. I've talked to people who've been in a slow decline for so long they stopped noticing it. And when you look at the actual markers, the inflammatory proteins in the blood, the after-meal blood sugar patterns, it's been building for years, quietly. Because it doesn't announce itself with a single dramatic moment. It just adds up, morning after morning, until one day someone's telling you that the Saturday hiking you used to do without thinking twice is now something you have to plan around, or that getting down on the floor to play with the grandkids has become a whole production, or that gardening, something you did for hours without a second thought, now costs you 2 days of recovery. That's not aging. That's accumulated inflammation that was never interrupted. And that's exactly why a small, consistent daily habit can move the needle more than people expect. Not because 2 cloves cure anything, but because you're interrupting a chain that's been running quietly in the background for a very long time. So let's get into the actual results, and I'm going to start with the one nobody sees coming, blood sugar. If you're thinking, Okay, I'm not diabetic, this doesn't apply to me. Stay with me here, because this is exactly the kind of thing that applies whether you have a diagnosis or not. Here's what most people don't realize about blood sugar. Your fasting number, the one your doctor checks in the morning, is only half the picture. What happens to your glucose in the 2 hours after a meal? That's the reading researchers are increasingly saying matters more, because that's where the silent damage accumulates. Small spikes, repeated dozens of times a week over years. Your fasting glucose can look completely fine, while post-meal spikes are quietly aging your cardiovascular system, your kidneys, your joints. Roughly half of Americans over 50 are either pre-diabetic or trending that direction. And most of them have no idea, because their fasting number hasn't set off the alarm yet. So what does eugenol actually do about that? There was a study published in BMC Complementary Medicine and Therapies, a team out of India working with researchers in the US. They took 13 volunteers, some with normal blood sugar, some with elevated pre-diabetic levels, and gave them a clove extract once a day for 30 days. By day 12, post-meal blood glucose had dropped significantly in both groups. 21% in the healthy adults, 27% in the pre-diabetic group. That's the 12 days from earlier. That's where that number comes from. And the mechanism is specific. This isn't vague anti-inflammatory language. Eugenol directly inhibits the digestive enzymes responsible for breaking carbohydrates down into glucose in your gut. Slow those enzymes, and glucose enters your bloodstream more gradually. The spike is lower, the crash is less severe. The entire post-meal curve flattens out. Think of it this way. Normally, you eat something and your blood sugar climbs fast, like cresting a steep hill. Eugenol puts a speed bump on that climb. Not a wall, a speed bump. The peak is lower. Your pancreas isn't scrambling to catch up after every meal. Now, I'll be straight with you. This is a small pilot study, 13 people. More large-scale trials are needed before anyone draws hard conclusions. But the mechanism is well understood biochemically, and the result lines up exactly with what the science would predict. It's not a fluke finding. I see this pattern all the time. Someone comes in with normal fasting numbers, feels fine, thinks they're in the clear, and when you actually look at what their glucose is doing 2 hours after lunch, it tells a completely different story. The fasting number gave them a false sense of security for years. Meanwhile, in the background, the accumulation of post-meal spikes was doing its quiet work. 2 cloves in the morning is not a medication. But if eugenol is slowing down those digestive enzymes, even modestly, that's a meaningful intervention happening at the exact moment glucose enters the bloodstream. Before the spike, before the damage. Most people know cloves are good for teeth, but they don't know why, and they don't know how far that effect actually reaches. A 2006 trial published in the Journal of Dentistry, 73 adults, compared clove oil directly against benzocaine, the standard synthetic anesthetic dentists apply before a needle, the kind of numbing agent you get right before the injection goes in. Clove oil performed identically. Both significantly outperformed the placebo. This is what dentists relied on for centuries before synthetic drugs arrived and replaced it. The mechanism didn't go anywhere. The clove didn't change. Now this next one matters, because it's where the oral effect and everything else in this video converge. Those bacteria in your mouth we talked about earlier, the ones that enter the bloodstream through inflamed gum tissue, eugenol targets them directly, and unlike the systemic inflammation story, this one moves fast. Bacterial populations in the mouth can shift in days, not weeks, which is exactly why people notice the oral changes first. Your gums are a gateway. Most people treat them like a separate system. And here's what I find most concerning about that. Gum disease doesn't announce itself. The gums recede a little. There's some bleeding when you brush that you eventually stop noticing. You go to your cleanings, nothing dramatic gets flagged, and you leave thinking everything is fine. But consider what 10 years of ignoring that signal actually looks like. The research on this is clear. Chronic gum disease is one of the strongest predictors of tooth loss in adults over 60. Not from a single event, from slow, uninterrupted bacterial damage that finally crosses a threshold, and by the time it's causing visible problems, you're already in intervention territory. Root planing, bone loss, extractions, the kind of dental work that's expensive, painful, and completely avoidable if the bacteria had been addressed years earlier. I've talked to people who got there. Almost every one of them said the same thing. They had no idea it had been building. It doesn't have to go that way. That's the whole point of this. And this is exactly why the daily chewing habit matters beyond a clean feeling in the mouth. When eugenol is coating that gum tissue every morning, reaching the spaces between teeth, making contact with those bacterial colonies before they've had a chance to build, it's cutting off damage at the source. People notice this one fast. Gum bleeding slows. The mouth feels different, often within the first week. Two things, 12 days or less, something that costs less than $1 a month. One more piece, and I'll be up front that the human research is still catching up here. Several studies on eugenol have shown it reducing biochemical markers of liver damage, inflammation in liver tissue, oxidative stress, the cellular changes that precede serious liver disease. One study documented eugenol-rich fractions of clove reversing measurable signs of liver cirrhosis in an animal model. The liver is quiet until it isn't. And eugenol, as one of the most potent antioxidant compounds known, reaches liver tissue and interrupts oxidative damage before it compounds. Human trials are still needed. But for something this accessible and this well tolerated, it belongs in the conversation. So let's talk about the actual habit, because none of what we've covered matters if you don't know how to do it. The amount that keeps showing up across the research and in traditional use going back centuries is 1 to 2 cloves per day. That's it. Not a supplement stack, not a complicated protocol. 1 or 2 whole dried cloves, the kind you find in any grocery store for a few dollars. Most people chew them after a meal. That's the most strategic timing, because you want eugenol in your system right as those digestive enzymes are firing. That's when it can slow the carbohydrate breakdown. That's when the blood sugar effect happens. But some people prefer first thing in the morning as part of a routine. Both approaches work. Pick the one you'll actually stick to. The taste is strong. It'll numb your tongue slightly. That's not a side effect. That's the eugenol doing exactly what it does. Chew slowly, let the juice release, and after a few minutes, the fibrous part that remains can be spit out. You don't need to swallow the whole thing. 2 honest notes before you start. If you're on blood thinners, have a conversation with your doctor first. Eugenol has mild blood-thinning properties, nothing dramatic for most people, but worth flagging. And don't overdo it. 1 to 2 cloves daily is the window. More isn't better. High doses of eugenol over time can irritate the stomach lining. And there's an irony worth mentioning. The same compound that protects the liver in moderate amounts can stress it in excess. 2 cloves. That's the dose. Stay there. All right, let's come back to where we started. That woman in her mid-50s, blood sugar being watched, gums bleeding when she brushed, tired in a way that sleep wasn't fixing. She chewed 2 cloves every morning and went back to her doctor 2 weeks later with results that surprised everyone in the room. What happened wasn't magic. It was one compound, working on inflammation at the source, slowing the blood sugar spike, clearing the oral bacteria that had been entering her bloodstream every day. One small habit, multiple things shifting at once. That's why the results came faster than she expected, and faster than her doctor expected. The habit dentists relied on for centuries, the blood sugar result that showed up in 12 days. The systemic effect most people never connect to something this simple, sitting in a spice jar they already own. 2 cloves, after lunch or before breakfast. That's the whole ask. If this is the kind of thing you want more of, simple habits, real research, no hype, stick around and subscribe. There's a lot more of this coming. Take care of yourself.